Hi, welcome back. Today we'll be discussing another battle, and it is one everyone has likely heard of at one time or another. We'll be talking about the Battle of Thermopylae. It went down in history as a battle of courage against all odds, as it is often told as being 300 Spartans against a force of possibly upwards of 200,000 Persians, according to modern estimates. Let's talk about what led up to the battle itself, and a little bit about what followed. Most of what we go by is relayed to us by Herodotus, aka the father of history. He wrote the histories detailing the events of, among other things, the Battle of Thermopylae. So what even led up to this battle? Like with most battles throughout history, it boils down to a push for more land and more power. The party pushing for more land and more power in this context were the Persians. It started with Darius I and his expansion into Europe. He had already taken both Thrace and Macedonia, but still he wanted more. His next push would be for Athens, along with the rest of Greece. In 491 BCE, Darius I sent out emissaries to order the submission of the various Greek city-states. While most of the city-states folded under the pressure of the Persians, Athens and Sparta weren't having any of it. They both ended up executing the emissaries that were sent to them, as Sparta hadn't even attempted a trial before execution like Athens had. This effectively meant they were at war with Persia. By 486 BCE, Darius had built up a new and improved army with the intent of bringing Greece to heel. Before he could do that, however, Egypt revolted and pulled his attention away from Greece. During the preparation of a march on Egypt, Darius died. The throne was then passed on to his son, Xerxes I. Xerxes swiftly and harshly put down the Egyptian revolt, and then reverted his attention back to his father's original mission, crush Greece. He spent years planning, stockpiling, and building his army until he was finally ready in 480 BCE. Xerxes, however, was not the only one that was preparing. The Athenians had been preparing for just as long. They realized, however, that they didn't have the same manpower that the Persians did. To increase their numbers, they were going to have to form alliances with the various Greek city-states. What made this so complicated was the fact that many of the city-states were currently in conflict with each other, so getting them to agree to work together was no easy feat. In 481 BCE, Xerxes did the same as his father and again sent emissaries out to the different city-states, demanding that they pay tribute. But this time, he omitted Athens and Sparta for fear of them doing what they had done before and just killing the emissaries that were sent to them. After this, the city-states started to rally in support of Athens and Sparta and effectively for all of Greece. Even with the support of various city-states, they knew they still didn't have the numbers and would have to be very smart about their tactics. They knew that Xerxes had amassed a huge army and decided that their best option was to try and cut him off before he could ever make it all the way into Greece. The first attempt was at the Vale of Tempe, but the army retreated after figuring out that there was actually more than one way through. Their next option was the extremely narrow pass present at Thermopylae. Their strategy was actually twofold. So they would block the pass on land at Thermopylae while simultaneously blocking the Straits of Artemisium by sea, hopefully cutting Xerxes off completely. With the plan set, it was time to put it into motion. Onward to Thermopylae marched an army of between 6,000 and 7,000 men. This included 2,120 Arcadians, 1,000 Locrians, 1,000 Phocians, 700 Thespians, 400 Corinthians, 400 Thebans, 200 from Phlius, 80 Mycenaeans, and 300 Spartans. You may be wondering, the Spartans are arguably the most well-known and best soldiers in history, so why on earth did they only send 300 men? Well, This time of year was actually a celebration of Carnia, and during this time, military activity was forbidden by law. To really double down, it was also the time of the Olympic Games, making it even more taboo to go to war. Carnia was a celebration in honor of Apollo, and the Olympic Games were in honor of Zeus. And marching to war during these would have risked angering the gods. They couldn't let this happen because they knew that they would need the favor of the gods in order to have any chance at victory against the Persians. This resulted in King Leonidas of Sparta taking only his personal guard of 300 men. Something I found interesting was that, due to a prophecy foretold by the oracle at Delphi, Leonidas was said to have been sure he was marching towards a certain death. Despite this, he still went, and in light of the prophecy signaling death to those going, he selected only Spartans with living sons to go with him, thus ensuring that their lines would continue after their deaths. That's how sure he was of their imminent loss. So we have our Greek army of, at most, 7,000 men, and the Greek navy with 300 triremes marching and sailing onto their locations. While they were marching, they actually had an advance of good fortune as a huge storm blew in and battered the Persian navy and destroyed a third of their 700 to 800 triremes. The Greeks thanked the gods and set up on land at Thermopylae. Xerxes arrived at the pass with his force of anywhere from 70,000 to 250,000 men. It's hard to nail down an exact number because historic sources like Herodotus place it from between 1.7 million and 2.4 million, but modern historians are the ones who are estimating it closer to 200,000. It's said that upon arrival, Xerxes initially thought that the Greeks would run away after seeing the sheer size of his army. After 4 to 5 days, though, they were still holding strong and ready for battle. He sent out an emissary and told them that he would allow them to surrender if they would lay down their arms. Leonidas's response of "come and get them" has now gone down in history. Important to note here, before getting into the actual battle, is that the two armies actually had very different styles of warfare. If you saw my video on the Battle of Culloden, it was similar to how the British and the Jacobites had extremely varying styles of warfare. The Persians were all about initial long-range attacks using archers, and their cavalry would come in after for cleanup. The Greeks, much like the Jacobites, preferred fighting in close quarters. They would arrange themselves in a densely packed formation called a phalanx and utilize swords or spears. The differing tactics in battle is another thing that made the Greeks' choice of Thermopylae for their arena so strategic. In theory, this would work better for the Greeks as they'd have the Persians tightly packed in the pass and would be able to utilize their preferred style of fighting, close quarters. Let's see how it worked out. So the battle took place over 3 days, starting possibly August 18th, 480, around September 18th, 480, or sometime in between. On the first day of battle, Xerxes sent forth both the Median and Kissian troops who failed to clear a path. He then sent forward his elite group of warriors called the Immortals, but still they failed. So far, the Greek strategy was paying off. On the second day, Xerxes still attempted to clear the pass, all while the Greeks were still holding strong. Things were going well until we had a traitor in the midst. This traitor was named Ephialtes, and in exchange for a reward, informed Xerxes of an alternative route through the pass. Fun fact, Ephialtes would later come to mean nightmare in the Greek language. They're actually still so rightfully hurt about it that look how they portrayed him in the movie 300. Using this alternative path provided to them would allow the Persians to move on without the use of the narrow pass and would give them the added bonus of flanking the Greek army. Sensing what was about to happen and realizing that despite his best efforts, the prophecy was going to come to pass, he ordered the majority of the Greek forces to retreat before they were cut off and unable to do so. Unlike what is often taught, the final stand wasn't solely 300 Spartans. 700 Thespians and 400 Thebans also remained behind. Still, this was a very small force compared to the huge Persian force. At this point, they knew they couldn't win, but they were now shooting for their next best outcome, which was to delay the Persian army to allow for the successful retreat of the larger majority and possibly some reinforcements, although they knew that wasn't likely. The now severely diminished force, headed by Leonidas and his Spartans, held out as long as possible, but things progressed quickly. Leonidas was killed, the hoplites were surrounded, and then the Persians let loose a hailstorm of arrows until no one on the opposing side was left standing. Xerxes then ordered that Leonidas's head was to be put on a spike and displayed on the battlefield. With that, the prophecy of the oracle had come to pass. While it's known that all of the Spartans, and likely all of the Thespians and Thebans had died, the losses on the Greek side were estimated at a total of about 4,000. This is actually astounding considering they were a force of about 7,000, facing down a force of, at the very least, 10 times their own. They managed to kill about 20,000 Persians. So going with the most conservative number of Persians, with 1/10 of the numbers, the Greeks managed to take out 5 times as many Persians as the Persians took out Greeks. Now for a quick rundown of what happened in the following years. Xerxes continued on his path toward Greece now that it seemed to be wide open. On the other hand, Leonidas's brother was busy preparing and started to build a defensive wall in Corinth before it was held up due to winter weather. That put a temporary stop on the land advance of the Persians. On the sea, however, after a draw at Artemisium, the Greeks were able to pull off a decisive victory at Salamis. With Xerxes back in the comfort of his palace and General Mardonius heading the invasion, they headed on. The Greeks were ready. They met the Persians at Plataea with a huge hoplite army in August 479 BCE. There were about 40,000 Greeks and about 100,000 Persians. During this attack, Mardonius was killed and the Persians retreated. The retreat caused further casualties and thousands more were killed. In all, about 2,000 Greeks died compared to 30,000 Persians. While this decisive victory by the Greeks didn't completely end war with Persia, it did keep them from ever attempting to invade Greece again. This is a perfect example of losing the battle, like at Thermopylae, but winning the war. While the Greeks did lose the battle at Thermopylae, it has been heralded not only in Greek history, but throughout world history as well, as a huge win for freedom and autonomy. Had the Persians overtaken the Greeks with their Western militaristic views, the idea of freedom as it is may not have arisen. We wouldn't have many of the greats like Sophocles or Aristotle, works like the Parthenon, or more broadly, the Enlightenment and ideas of democracy that would follow. If only Leonidas knew just how important his final stand was to the rest of history. Thankfully, he's commemorated with games each year and statues in his honor, including one at the site of the battle. The statues of him even commonly have his trademark saying, "Come and get them," inscribed on them. The strength and courage of these Spartan soldiers, especially these headed by Leonidas at this Battle of Thermopylae, will forever be remembered. Well, that is all for today's video on the Battle of Thermopylae. I hope you learned something, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.